That Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to kind of introduce the lesson today because it's the first one in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. So I thought it might be helpful to just introduce the book a little bit. Now, most Christians certainly, are familiar with Vayikra as the term Leviticus, okay, which basically focuses on the priesthood, the Levites, and the Levitical priesthood, and their laws and things. So they kind of focus on that. Where Vayikra is some of that. Let me get, okay. I think I was out of alignment there. Okay. So I don't. And for those off on the hinterlands over yonder, there's Vayikra in Hebrew, all right? Vayikra, and that's for, yeah, okay, Vayikra. So, now, I didn't know quite how to accomplish this, but in the Torah scroll, and you can only see this in a Torah scroll, and there are certain elements within the Torah scroll that you can only see. Translations cannot capture it. No matter how hard they try, a translation cannot capture it. And this is the case here with Vayikra. You'll notice that the Hebrew is read from left to right. So if you look at the last letter in Vayikra, you'll see that it's quite a bit smaller than the other letters, except for the yod, of course. But it's a full-size letter normally, unusually. So it draws attention to that, the fact that the last letter in Vayikra is small, very small. And there's been much discussion by the sages and rabbis as to why this is. And I just wanted to say that the best explanation currently that I've come across is this one. Exodus leaves you hanging at the end. We have the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, completed. And amazingly, it is perfect. Perfect. Now, this is where Christian theology has a real problem, because they said, impossible, man can't do anything that's perfect. The tabernacle was perfect. Amen. And it was made in partnership with God, which should tell us something about the level of perfection required and even the capability. God enabled through His Spirit the artisans to do the work. And and it's a celebration. It's a culmination. Deliverance from Egypt, and now God dwelling in our presence. There's a real highlight. And then God's glory fills the tabernacle to such an extent, not even Moshe can enter. He can't even enter. And that's where we leave Exodus. We're left hanging. It's an unfinished story. We have to go to the very next book, which is Vayikra. And the first word in Vayikra is, and he called. And he called. Hey, who starts their book with a conjunction? And he called. Wait a minute. What? That's because that's referring you back to Exodus, to the previous Torah scroll. It's an unending story. It's a continuous process here. So we're continuing on with Vayikra. Okay? In the Torah scroll, that first word, in which the book is named after, and he called, ends with an aleph. And it's really small compared to the rest. So, sages, the best story I've heard is this one, trying to understand why Why is this? And it's because with all this majesty and glory and God's divine presence filling the tabernacle, imagine what it was like when the shofar sounded, when God sounded his shofar and the mountain shook and the sound was so loud and everybody was frightened. They said, Moses, you go to God. We'll stay back here. You go in our place and you tell us what we need to do. They didn't want that level of intimacy because of fear. Because of fear. But this is what God is calling for. So when it says, and he called, it's a small aleph at the end. And he called. He called Moshe to the tabernacle, to his presence. He called, but it wasn't the thunderous command. He called out to Moses, and everybody can hear, come. It's not like in the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Boom, thunder and lightning. No. He whispers. God whispers to Moshe. He calls softly. He calls intimately. He calls like a husband whispering to his bride. I won't go any further than that at this point. Okay? It's a level of intimacy that God is calling Moshe to. All right. Okay, so let's begin. We'll read the first 5 chapters, which is our Torah portion today. And let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech ha'olam, asher kadashanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzavanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with commandments and commanded us to study words of Torah. Chapter 1, Vayikra. Adonai called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, speak to the people of Yisrael. Say to them, when any of you brings an offering to Adonai, you may bring your animal offering either from the herd or from the flock. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he must offer a male without defect. He is to bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting so that it can be accepted by Adonai. He is to lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. He is to slaughter the young bull before Adonai, and the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to present the blood. They are to splash the blood against all sides of the altar, which is by the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to skin the burnt offering and cut it in pieces. The descendants of Aaron, the Kohen, are to put fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. The sons of Aaron, the Kohen, are to arrange the pieces, the head, and the fat on the wood, which is on the fire on the altar. He is to wash the entrails and lower parts of the legs with water. And the Kohen is to cause all of it to go up in smoke on the altar as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering is from the flock, whether from the sheep or from the goats, for a burnt offering, he must offer a male without defect. He is to slaughter it on the north side of the altar before Adonai, and the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to splash its blood against all sides of the altar. He is to cut it into pieces, and the Kohen is to arrange them with the head and fat on the wood, which is on the fire on the altar. He is to wash the entrails and lower parts of the legs with water. And the Kohen is to offer it all and make it go up in smoke on the altar as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering to Adonai is a burnt offering of birds, he must offer a dove or a young pigeon. The Kohen is to bring it to the altar, snap off its head, and make it go up in smoke on the altar. Its blood is to be drained out on the side of the altar. He is to remove the food pouch and its feathers from its neck and discard it on the pile of ashes just east of the altar. He is to pull it open with a wing on each side, but without tearing it in half. The Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar, on the wood which is on the fire, as a burnt offering. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. Chapter 2. Anyone who brings a grain offering to Adonai is to make his offering of fine flour. He is to pour olive oil on it and put frankincense on it. He is to bring it to the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim. The Kohen is to take a handful of fine flour from it, together with its olive oil and all its frankincense, and make this reminder portion go up in smoke on the altar as an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is an especially holy part of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. When you bring a grain offering which has been baked in the oven, it is to consist of either unleavened cakes made of fine flours mixed with olive oil, or matzah spread with olive oil. If your offering is a grain offering cooked on a griddle, it is to consist of unleavened fine flour mixed with olive oil. You are to break it in pieces and pour olive oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your offering is a grain offering cooked in a pot, it is to consist of fine flour with olive oil. You are to bring the grain offering prepared in any of these ways to Adonai. It is to be presented to the Kohen, and he is to bring it to the altar. The Kohen is to remove the reminder portion of the grain offering and make it go up in smoke on the altar as an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It is an especially holy part of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. No grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven, because you are not to cause any leaven or honey to go up in smoke as an offering made by fire to Adonai. As an offering of first fruits, you may bring these to Adonai, but they are not to be brought up onto the altar to make a fragrant aroma. You are to season every grain offering of yours with salt. Do not omit from your grain offering the salt of the covenant, with your God, but offer salt with all your offerings. If you bring a grain offering of first fruits to Adonai, you are to bring as the grain offering from your first fruits kernels of grain from fresh ears, dry roasted with fire. Put olive oil on it and lay frankincense on it. It is a grain offering. The Kohen is to cause the reminder portion of it, its grits and olive oil, with all its frankincense, to go up in smoke. It is an offering made by fire for Adonai. Chapter 3. If his offering is a sacrifice of peace offerings, then if he offers before Adonai an animal from the herd, then no matter whether it is male or female, it must be without defect. He is to lay his hand on the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are to splash the blood against all sides of the altar. He is to present the sacrifice of the peace offerings as an offering made by fire to Adonai. It is to consist of the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. Aaron's sons will make it go up in smoke on the altar on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood on the fire. It is an offering made by fire, a fragrant aroma for Adonai. If his offering for a sacrifice of peace offerings to Adonai is from the flock, then when he offers it, no matter whether it is male or female, it must be without defect. If he brings a lamb for his offering, then he is to present it before Adonai. He is to lay his hand on the head of this offering and slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron are to splash its blood against all sides of the altar. From the sacrifices made as peace offerings, he is to present Adonai with an offering made by fire. It is to consist of its fat, the entire fat tail, which he will remove close to the lower backbone, the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. The Kohen will make it go up in smoke on the altar. It is food, an offering made by fire to Adonai. If his offering is a goat, then he is to present it before Adonai. He is to lay his hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tent of meeting. And the sons of Aaron are to splash his blood against all sides of the altar. He is to present from it his offering, an offering made by fire to Adonai. It is to consist of the fat covering the inner organs and all the fat above the inner organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys. The Kohen will make them go up in smoke on the altar. It is food, an offering made by fire to be a fragrant aroma. All the fat belongs to Adonai. It is to be a permanent regulation through all your generations, wherever you live, that you will eat neither fat nor blood. Chapter 4. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel, if anyone sins inadvertently against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, if he does any one of them, Then, if it is the anointed Kohen who sinned and thus brought guilt on the people, he is to offer Adonai a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he committed. He must bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai, lay his hand on the bull's head, and slaughter the bull in the presence of Adonai. The anointed Kohen is to take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times in the presence of Adonai in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. The Kohen is to put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense before Adonai, there in the tent of meeting. All the remaining blood of the bull is to be poured out at the base of the altar for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to remove from the bull for the sin offering all of its fat, the fat covering the inner organs, all the fat above the inner organs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them near the flanks, and the covering of the liver, which he will remove with the kidneys, as it is removed from an ox sacrificed as a peace offering. And the Kohen is to make these parts go up in smoke on the altar for burnt offerings. But the bull's hide and all its flesh, with its head, the lower parts of its legs, its inner organs, and dung, in other words, the entire bull, he is to bring outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are emptied out. There he is to burn it on wood with fire. There, where the ashes are emptied out, it is to be burned up. If the entire community of Israel inadvertently makes a mistake, with the assembly being unaware of the matter, and they do something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, they are guilty. When the sin they have committed becomes known, then the assembly is to offer a young bull as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. The leaders of the community are to lay their hands on the bull's head and slaughter the bull in the presence of Adonai. The anointed Kohen is to bring some of the bull's blood to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times in the presence of Adonai in front of the curtain. He is to put some of the blood on the horns of the altar before Adonai, there in the tent of meeting. All the remaining blood he's to pour out at the base of the altar for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He is to remove all its fat and make it go up in smoke on the altar. This is what he is to do with the bull. He must do the same with this bull as he does with the one for the sin offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for them, and they will be forgiven. He is to bring the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering for the assembly. When a leader sins and inadvertently does something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty. If the sin which he committed becomes known to him, he is to bring as his offering a male goat without defect. Lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it in the place where they slaughter the burnt offering in the presence of Adonai. It is a sin offering. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. Its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar for burnt offerings. All its fat he is to make go up in smoke on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice for peace offerings. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to his sin, and he will be forgiven. If an individual among the people commits a sin inadvertently, doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty. If the sin he committed becomes known to him, he is to bring as his offering a female goat without defect for the sin he committed. Lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter the sin offering in the place of burnt offerings. The Kohen is to take some of its blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. All its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar. All its fat he is to remove, as the fat is removed from the sacrifice for peace offerings. And the Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar as a fragrant aroma for Adonai. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. If he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he is to bring a female without defect. Lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it as a sin offering in the place where they slaughter burnt offerings. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. All its remaining blood he is to pour out at the base of the altar. All its fat he is to remove, as the fat of a lamb is removed from the sacrifice for peace offerings. And the Kohen is to make it go up in smoke on the altar, on top of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin he committed, and he will be forgiven. Chapter 5. If a person who is a witness sworn to testify sins by refusing to tell what he has seen or heard about the matter, he must bear the consequences. If a person touches something unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animal, a domestic animal, or a reptile, he is guilty, even though he may not be aware that he is unclean. If he touches some human uncleanness, no matter what the source of his uncleanness is, and is unaware of it, then when he learns of it, he is guilty. If someone allows to slip from his mouth an oath to do evil or to do good, and he doesn't remember that he clearly spoke this oath, then, no matter what it was about, when he learns of it, he is guilty. A person guilty of any of these things is to confess in what manner he sinned and bring his guilt offering to Adonai for the sin he committed. It is to be a female from the flock, either a lamb or a goat, as a sin offering. And the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to his sin. If he can't afford a lamb, he is to bring as his guilt offering for the sin he committed 2 doves or 2 young pigeons for Adonai, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. He is to bring them to the Kohen, who will offer the one for a sin offering first. He is to wring its neck, but not remove the head. Sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the side of the altar, and drain out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. He is to prepare the second as a burnt offering in the manner prescribed. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin which he committed, and he will be forgiven. But if his means are insufficient, even for 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, then he is to bring as his offering for the sin he committed 2 quarts of fine flour for a sin offering. He is not to put any olive oil or frankincense on it, because it is a sin offering. He is to bring it to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to take a handful of it as its reminder portion and make it go up in smoke on the altar on top of the offerings for Adonai made by fire. It is a sin offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him in regard to the sin he committed concerning any of these things, and he will be forgiven. The rest will belong to the Kohanim, as with the grain offering. Adonai said to Moshe, if anyone acts improperly and inadvertently sins in regard to the holy things of Adonai, he is to bring as his guilt offering for Adonai a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent in silver shekels, using the sanctuary shekel as the standard, according to your appraisal of its value. It is a guilt offering. In addition, he is to make restitution for whatever he did wrong in regard to the holy thing. Moreover, he is to add to that 1/5 and give it to the Kohen. Then the Kohen will make atonement with the ram of the guilt offering, and he will be forgiven. If someone sins by doing something against any of the mitzvot of Adonai concerning things which should not be done, he is guilty, even if he is unaware of it, and he bears the consequences of his wrongdoing. He must bring a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent, according to your appraisal, to the Kohen for a guilt offering. The Kohen will make atonement concerning the error which he committed, even though he was unaware of it, and he will be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He is certainly guilty before Adonai. Adonai said to Moshe, if someone sins and acts perversely against Adonai by dealing falsely with his neighbor in regard to a deposit or security entrusted to him, by stealing from him, by extorting him, or by dealing falsely in regard to a lost object he has found, or by swearing to a lie. If a person commits any of these sins, then, if he sinned and is guilty, he is to restore whatever it was he stole or obtained by extortion, or whatever was deposited with him, or the lost object which he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely. He is to restore it in full, plus an additional 1/5. He must return it to the person who owns it on the day when he presents his guilt offering. He is to bring as his guilt offering to Adonai a ram without defect from the flock, or its equivalent according to your appraisal. To the Kohen, it is a guilt offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for him before Adonai, and he will be forgiven in regard to whatever it was he did that made him guilty. Who has any questions or comments? Ah, Dr. Haney, yeah. No, you're just teasing me. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We don't have much time.
Yeah. Oh, I have a question.
There we go.
Is the purpose for the sacrifice when you put your hands on the forehead of the animal, it's to confess your sins and put your sin with the animal, and then it's sacrificed? That's the purpose?
Very good question. And boy, how I wish I had a very good answer to go along with it. It's even more complicated than that. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Not only does he lay his hand on it, he actually does the slaughtering. There's a misconception that many have is that the priests do the slaughtering. No. As you saw in the text as we read, it's the one bringing the offering that is doing the slaughtering. And the priest is collecting the blood. And then, yes, then they'll take the parts and the pieces and arrange them and burn them. But the Kohen is not, the priest is not the one killing all these animals. You are the one killing the animal. You are the one slaughtering the animal at the tent of meeting. Because this animal is you. It's you. It's showing what you deserve, and you're acknowledging. And this animal is, innocent animal, is taking your place. So it's there because of sin. It's not because God wants all this blood. It's because it's what's required to atone for your sin. It's what's required to be forgiven. So it's but the thing is, you will have to actually cut that innocent animal's throat and let it bleed out in your presence and the priest. And you will hopefully realize what's happening. Because what God really wants, and wanted all along, we're out of time, is our heart. He wants our heart. He wants us to feel it. He wants us to feel it. He wants us to desire this intimacy with him. And the only way we can have it is with a clean heart, a pure heart. So part of that process of forgiveness is to instruct us how that's accomplished. The Hebrew word korban, the root of that is to draw near. Christian theology has gone off on this tangent concerning sacrifices and have lost all perspective to what has really happened. Everything is laid on Yeshua for the sacrifice that he made. And yes, there is an element of sacrifice here. There is. But it is not the most important element. By far, it is not the most important element. It's not what we're sacrificing. It's not what we're giving up. It's our heart. It's how we are to draw near to God. And so, as you go through Tony's study, I think you'll capture some of this aspect of what Yeshua has accomplished in the manner in which he accomplished it. So, anyway, we'll leave that with you. Thank you for your attention as we start the book of Vayikra. And he called. And he's calling us now. He's calling us to love and intimacy in his very presence. Amen? Amen. Amen. Thank you.